Welcome to this Water Talk. I am extremely excited about it. I'm Mary Hunt at Water. I'm here in the office with Diane New, and we have the pleasure of welcoming Meg Stapleton Smith, who is the editor of this wonderful new book, the Mary Daly book, Catholicism End or Beginning. And I have to say that I've been looking forward to this for some time because I think that this is not only a wonderful project, but I want to really celebrate today Meg Stapleton Smith and her remarkable scholarship, which has made this all possible. So, my very best wishes to all of you as we start this session. And I want to say once again how exciting it is to have several of the authors of the essays in the book with us as well. And I will mention their names very shortly. But it is an honor for Water to host the first public conversation about this very important book. So I welcome each and every one of you and look forward to your conversation with us on this volume. In the interest of full disclosure, I'm hosting this session, but I'm also a contributor of an essay in the book. I was also involved in some of the early thinking about the volume, as I was then the literary executor for Mary Daly. From sightings of this book in Barnes & Noble in New Mexico, and from the first review by British theologian Lavinia Byrne, it's clear that there's already some buzz about this book. We at Water begin our programs with a land acknowledgement. It's something that we've incorporated into everything we do to remind ourselves of why we do what we do and what we need to do more of. What we need to do more of given the systemic injustice Indigenous and other people of color face in this country. A land acknowledgement is a beginning, not an end. It's a time to reflect on our history and to commit to justice making. Water is on Indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland, the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and injustice toward Indigenous people and other people of color that is so deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it and to make reparations for the genocide involved. Water's work, whether intellectual, liturgical, spiritual, is aimed to bring about social justice. So consider for a quiet moment collectively the Native people on whose land you sit, and feel free to put their names in the chat if you wish, as a way of paying homage to them. Let's just take a quiet moment. We could also take a moment to acknowledge with deepest regret the wars in Gaza, Israel, Ukraine, Russia, and now in the Middle East, with 15 countries and hundreds of casualties, including scores of school children. We at Water condemn the violence that the U.S. perpetrates and join with people of goodwill worldwide in nonviolent efforts to stem the tide. May this session, may our time together be a contribution toward peace. I note, too, that one of the authors of one of the chapters of this book, Zara Mobala, is from Iran, now teaching at Harvard Divinity School. I simply want to send our solidarity to her and to her family and friends, as I'm sure they're experiencing this in a very different way than many of us. I also announce with regret that Emily Culpepper, longtime friend and close collaborator with Mary Daly, mentioned in Jennifer Reisinger's chapter in the book, passed away recently. This afternoon, we treasure Emily Culpepper's memory, and I'm wearing a piece of jewelry that she gave to me. You can be sure that Water will protect spaces for this kind of conversation and expand them in the months ahead, come what may. Feel free to join us and to suggest topics, speakers, books, films, articles we might fruitfully explore. The stakes have never been higher, the need for social change-driven scholarship more obvious. With that, let me introduce our speaker, editor Meg Stapleton Smith, who will provide an overview of Catholicism, End or Beginning. This is published by Cambridge University Press. It is, as you know, the lost but now found manuscript of Mary Daly, and Meg will tell us all about it. Let me introduce Meg, however, so that you know who she is and where she comes from. And also let me mention that the floor will be open for questions and discussion after Meg finishes her remarks. We will close officially at the top of the hour, which is 2 o'clock here on the East Coast of the United States. The Zoom will remain open for about 15 minutes after that so that we have time for informal conversation if needed or wanted, but we really will honor your schedules and our own by finishing at the top of the hour. So please sit back, listen, and enjoy. We'll take notes. I know Meg has some notes. They'll all be on our website shortly, along with the video of this session. And you can access it by going on our website at www.waterwomensalliance.org and look under programs and teleconferences with today's date and Meg's name. And feel free to rewatch this, to share the session with others. We'll send you the notes, and we'll also send you a link to that video in the next week. But just enjoy the session now and bring to it your full attention so you don't have to worry about, oh, did I get that? Did I get the other thing? We'll even worry about some of the spellings. I want to acknowledge several key collaborators in this project. Meg will mention the chapter authors, but I want to thank two of them who are here with us today. One, if I can find her, is Sochi Alviso. Is she with us, Sochi? Yes, there she is. Hello, Sochi, welcome. And the other is Jennifer Reisinger. I see Jennifer as well. And these are two of the essayists, as it were, of the 6 essays that follow the 4 chapters of Mary Daly. I want to thank both of you for being here. I also want to acknowledge the presence of the great Irish theologian Mary Condren today. She's with us, who gave a wonderful and very thorough blurb of the book. And the short version is on the outside and the longer version is on the inside. But thank you to Mary Condren for granting her imprimatur, as it were. Also, Marie Fortune. Is Marie Fortune with us? Let's see. Signed up. Probably will get here shortly if she's not. Marie Fortune also gave a very generous blurb. Laurel Schneider, Judith Plaskow, all of them were very gracious in extending their endorsements. So I want to thank them. And finally, I want to thank, in a particular way, and I'll hawk the book one more time for you, Alex, Alex Wright, who is the editor from Cambridge University Press, who understood the importance of this project from the beginning. And I want to offer our thanks to him as well. I notice also Lisa Cahill is just joining us. She's another one of the authors of the essays in the book. So welcome to Lisa Cahill. And again, thanks to the writers, Jennifer, Sochi, Lisa, Mary Condren for her blurb, and others for really getting this book off to a great start and taking very seriously the work of Mary Daly as it passes into history, but with its own, I think, unique and powerful presence. So turning to Meg. Meg Smith is an adjunct professor of theology and ethics at Fordham University, and she's also an Episcopal priest. She did her BA at Boston College, a master's at Yale in ethics, and a PhD at Fordham University, writing about, and I quote the title, Queer Virtue Ethics, Mary Daly's Challenge to Catholic Sexual Ethics, Queer Virtue Ethics. Wonderful. I can't wait to read that. How did I miss it? Meg Stapleton Smith, as this book gives evidence, is a super sleuth of a researcher. Faced with her own questions about Mary Daly and Mary Daly's work, she found this unfinished, unpublished manuscript that I think Jennifer Reisinger and I and some other naive souls innocently put into the Mary Daly archives at Smith College, the Sophia Smith collection. We didn't know what we had done, and you saved us, you rescued us, Meg, from a huge mistake. I want to describe Meg in her own words because she does it in such lovely remarks in the acknowledgments. They tell her story very well. I quote Meg Stapleton Smith. In Mary Daly's work, she makes many references to the ways that women of today are the embodiment and realization of the dreams and hopes of women from the past. I never met Mary Daly, as many contributors to this volume have, but I am convinced that my vocational life would not be possible had it not been for her courage. I am a queer, married, Episcopal priest and theological ethicist who was trained in Roman Catholic theology and shaped by Thomas Aquinas' theology as Daly was. Even though Mary Daly would have had many questions for me, as I would for her, the fact that I exist in all of the spaces is a testament to the path that she and so many other feminist theologians and philosophers paved. May we all continue to raise up the new images of being, B-E-ing, as Mary Daly did for us. That's Meg Stapleton Smith in her own words. Meg, you've done Mary Daly proud in this wonderful book, and I'm sure you and Mary Daly would have had a lot to talk about and enjoyed doing it. Instead, it's our privilege today to be with you. I welcome you with thanks and look forward to learning from you. Meg Stapleton Smith.
Well, thank you so much. This Thank you to Mary for this invitation. This is certainly one of those full circle moments. Mary was the first person that I called when I unearthed this manuscript in Daly's archives. And I also remember my first visit to Water and Mary showing me all the copies of Daly's books that Daly herself had signed to Water with Courage, Mary Daly. My talk will be broken into three parts today. In the first part, I will offer a bit about the story behind the manuscript. The second part, I'll offer what I consider to be the most fascinating parts of the manuscript and how they foreshadow the intellectual journey that Daly went on to take. And by way of conclusion, I'll offer a reflection on how this foreshadowing helps us to grapple with the central question of the manuscript. Has Catholicism reached its end, or is there hope for a genuine new beginning? So first, how I came to discover this manuscript. During the last semester of my doctoral studies, we were assigned Mary Daly's The Church in the Second Sex. It was the third time I had read it. But admittedly, it had taken me 8 years of theological training to realize that Mary Daly had written anything after 1974. In my time studying theology at Boston College, at Yale, and at Fordham, I had been handed a conventional narrative. Although Mary Daly paved the way for feminist theology, her career ended when she left the Roman Catholic Church. Reading The Church in the Second Sex during that last semester brought forth a new set of questions. I was struck by the difference between the Mary Daly who wrote the book in 1968 and the Mary Daly in 1975 and 1985 who ruthlessly scrutinized her own previous writings. The difference between this early Daly and later Daly, which we can trouble later, struck me. It encouraged me to delve deeper into her scholarship and her philosophical vision. As I write in the introduction to the volume, I was enthralled by her brilliance, her iconoclastic radicalism, drawn to the woman who dared to say what so many others of her time could not. I was captivated by her relentless hope to dream that a different world was possible. But above all, I was intrigued by this woman who was trained as a Roman Catholic theologian, the woman who received 3 PhDs in Catholic theology, a lady's degree from St. Mary's when women weren't admitted to PhD programs in the US, 2 doctorates from the University of Fribourg in Switzerland. I was fascinated by this woman who borrowed a journalist's press pass and snuck into the Second Vatican Council, the same woman who grew up in a Catholic home in upstate New York. As I read more about Daly, I began to notice her indebtedness to Thomas Aquinas, how her own philosophy in many ways mirrored the theological underpinnings of Catholic moral thought, and how she even continued to engage, even if just with a nod, Catholic sources all the way through Amazon Grace and Quintessence. So I began to wonder whether or not Mary Daly abandoned the Catholic Church as vehemently as contemporary Catholic academics suggested she had after her infamous walkout of patriarchal religion at Harvard Memorial Church on that autumn day in 1971. I became convinced that there was a part of Daly's story that wasn't being told, and so I guess I went to the archives in search of an untold story to try uncovering parts of Daly's own narrative that might be worth returning to. I began looking through the boxes from the years of 1968 to 1973, the time in between the writing of The Church in the Second Sex and Beyond God the Father, and that's when I came across a folder entitled Catholicism End or Beginning. And I have the original scan of that right here. Contained within it were 4 chapters of this unfinished book. She had only drafted about half of the chapters that she had planned and outlined, 3 left remaining. And that is now what you have before you today. It's the unfinished manuscript in all of its incompleteness, with reflective essays and contributions from Dr. Hunt, Dr. Alviso, Dr. Isinga, Dr. Cahill, Dr. Mabalig, and Dr. Garrigan. So now I'll shift to what I find to be the most fascinating part of this manuscript, other than its existence, which, as Mary Hunt said, is thrilling enough. At the time Delia was writing this manuscript, which I date to about 1969 to 1970, she believed that the state of Christianity could be understood as a dialectic between what she called the Protestant principle and the Catholic substance. The Catholic substance is the sacraments, creeds, the liturgical ceremonies, the dogmas. And the Protestant principle is an attitude which is self-critical, which recognizes the relativity of all objectifications of faith. As Dr. Alviso rightly names in her chapter in the volume, Daly brings the Catholic substance and Protestant principle into view in order to highlight a central problem. Namely, that when the elements of the Catholic substance are fixed, quote, void of the Protestant principle and made into idols, it creates what Daly terms as a demonic sacramentalism. In turn, the Catholic substance loses sight of those original revelatory experiences which brought it into being. If the Protestant principle and the Catholic substance are held in productive tension with one another, then they can generate a theonomous synthesis and an authentic faith. The crisis of faith that we see in our midst, Daly contends, is the inability to keep the dialectic between the Protestant principle and the Catholic substance. Even as Daly wrote about the desire for this theonomous synthesis, she said that there's no guarantee that disintegration won't happen. And I wonder if, as she constructed her vision of the theonomous synthesis, if she felt some emptiness or apathy. Has Catholicism reached its end, or is there a genuine hope for a new beginning? The theonomous synthesis was the best that she could conjure up for the hope of a new beginning for Catholicism, within the particular frame of reference that she was working with at the time. That was the best her intellectual efforts could produce. And I wonder how limiting that dream felt. And that leads to one of the most pressing questions of the text, which is, why did Mary Daly abandon writing this manuscript? My sense is that, in part, it was the result of how limiting that theological vision felt. In Outer Course, her autobiography, Daly is fairly flippant about dropping the manuscript. She writes, and I quote, "One might say this was the beginning of the end of my concern over the fate of Catholicism. Probably the question mark at the end of each title was the most significant part. At any rate," she continues, "the project failed to sustain my interest. It fell apart in the middle, or one could say that it was an abortive effort." The authors in the volume, myself included, believe that the unfinished manuscript is not merely an example of academic procrastination, or that it simply stopped meeting her intellectual curiosity. Rather, the fact that she stopped writing the manuscript is actually profoundly significant and mirrors her own intellectual and spiritual journey. For Lisa Cahill, who's with us today, Daly's hope in reformist Catholicism had been lost. Cahill maintains that Daly left the church in search of a deeper relationship with the good, capital G good, and in search of feminist community that was nowhere to be found within the church at the time. For others in the volume, including Hunt and Garrigan and Risinga, the death of Daly's mother, her own sexual awakening, and the socio-historical context of the Vietnam War, civil rights, and feminist movements all contributed to her moving on from the manuscript and the Catholic Church. It's unsurprising, Garrigan observes, that the manuscript ends when Daly gets to the question of Christ, for it would have demanded her to engage with the practice, for it would have required the book to become, and I quote Garrigan here, to become fleshing, feeling, and individual, rather than heady and abstract and corporate. The personal, Garrigan concludes, did indeed become political. Now, as the editor, I wrote the introduction, but I did not write a chapter reflecting on the content of the manuscript. But if I had, I would have focused on how her discussion of the Catholic substance and Protestant principle, as well as her discussion of courage, foreshadowed what Daly later developed as the virtue of the courage to leave. So I'll talk a little bit about that now. In the manuscript, Daly draws on Tillich's distinction between individualization and participation. At this point in her career, Daly, following Tillich, articulates existential courage as having two sides: the courage to be as a self and the courage to be as a part. The former, self-affirmation as self, implies that one must struggle for autonomy and authenticity. And here I quote Daly, even if this means painful clashes with external authorities, civil or ecclesiastical. This courage, Daly writes, quotes, quote, demands that we be ready to constantly criticize established laws, doctrines, and practices, and that we be ready for the emergence of new forms. On the other hand, Daly continues, the courage to be also involves self-affirmation as a part. And here I quote Daly again. This means that we should be faithful to the values which are preserved, the voice of the tradition, the body of symbols, doctrines, and structures we have inherited should be held in esteem, in the esteem that they deserve. Daly concludes, the courage to be as a part, and I'll say this slowly, demands that we continue to recognize whatever there is of value which formed us, and which formed the Christian community, while participating in the process of developing that tradition. In the New Archaic Afterwards to the Church in the Second Sex, written now roughly 16 years after this unfinished manuscript, Daly writes, quote, the basic terror engendering error is belief that the church has something special to offer, that something irreplaceable is bestowed upon women and through the church godfathers, and that leaving the church means spiritual death. She continues, the courage to leave springs from the deep knowledge of the nucleus of nothingness, which is at the core of fallacious faith that fixes its victims. Now, this understanding of courage and its relationship to institutional Christianity undoubtedly stands in stark contrast to the words of Mary Daly in Catholicism and Her Beginning. And this dissonance is emblematic of the intellectual journey that Daly took over the course of her career. Namely, that Daly began her career with hope that the church could change, ended her career with the belief that all ecclesial structures and religious institutions are irredeemably patriarchal. As seen in Daly's words from the New Archaic Afterwards, this is unmistakably a feature of her vision, for she clearly writes that institutional religion is the enemy of women's flourishing. For Daly, the courage to leave is a virtue which empowers women to leave the church in order to achieve psychic wholeness and liberation. But as I understand Daly's intellectual journey, there is a tension between the idea that there is a deep knowledge of the nucleus of nothingness, which is at the core of fallacious faith, and her words in Catholicism and Her Beginning, that we must participate in the developing of the tradition. Even though Daly maintained that all churches are manifestations of patriarchal religion, she continued to draw on Catholic methodologies and Christian sources within her vision of hope. Daly held on to the truth, as she wrote in Catholicism and Her Beginning, that there was indeed value in the tradition which formed her, even as she discarded elements of the Catholic teaching that inhibited her from achieving her own psychic wholeness and liberation. Daly's own story is evidence that leaving an institutional religion is not as simple as walking out the doors of a building, which is why I think that this manuscript not only foreshadows the courage to leave, but more profoundly, Daly's concept of boundary living as the place and space where psychic wholeness and liberation is achieved. Daly refers to boundary living throughout her corpus, but the best description can be found in her 1978 book, Gynecology. While addressing critics who claim that her work is separatist, Daly offers her own definition of separatism. Drawing on the etymology of the word, Daly contends that the, quote, deep questions that are being asked about separatism concern the problem of paring away the self from all that is alienating and confining. When Daly referred to, quote, boundary living, she meant quite literally existing on the boundary of patriarchal institutions in order to create a space where women's experience may be at the center of theological, philosophical, and political reflection. Yet for Daly, boundary living also demanded a continual, intentional process of paring away the self from all that is alienating and confining. Boundary living, Daly writes in Beyond God the Father, is a way of being in and out of the system. It entails a refusal of false clarity. In the unfinished manuscript, Daly writes that one must recognize the complexity of what it means to leave the Catholic Church. In fact, for one to claim that individuals are either inside or outside of the church is a false dichotomy. Moving outside of the church does not necessarily mean abandoning it in every sense, she writes. One could describe themselves as an alumna of the church, an expression which conveys the fact that a person is not severing all relationship to the church, but establishing a, quote, free and adult relationship to it. To pursue the analogy, she continues, alumni are, in fact, what an institution of learning is intended to produce, rather than perpetual undergraduates. The point of the church, she writes, is not to foster religious infantilism, but spiritual adulthood. Daly maintains that there are some religious and non-religious thinkers who cannot sustain the idea of an individual having an inside-outside relationship to Catholicism. There are scholars who think that people on the boundary of institutional Catholicism are, quote, doomed to a kind of isolation and ineffectiveness. And yet, she concludes, those who have been conditioned within the Catholic milieu can bring a critical distance to the tradition which is their heritage. And I'll conclude with this. In the feminist post-Christian introduction to the Church and the Second Sex, Daly reflected on her own belief in 1968 that change within the church often comes from individuals outside of the church. She writes in 1978 that her concept of change coming from outside that religious tradition did not satisfy her, quote, for she was not outside enough. Perhaps implying that the further she was from the church within this boundary space, the more liberated she would become and the more change she could enact in the church. All of this, for me, suggests that, yes, Daly had the courage to leave the Catholic Church and institutional religion to see, as she went on to define the virtue, the nucleus of nothingness that is at the core of all patriarchal religions. And yet, I hope that my remarks demonstrate that this volume shows the path Daly took to the space of boundary living, maintaining that inside-outside relationship with the Catholic Church. But, as Mary Hunt writes in her essay, in and out of the church is trivial. She did not go any place. She went everywhere. Importantly, even after she walked out of patriarchal religion, Daly continued to develop the tradition in which she was formed. She continued to participate in the process of changing the Christian and indeed Catholic theological tradition, radically transforming the institution from outside of its walls. Thank you, my friends. A gift to be with you all today. I'll look forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Meg Stapleton Smith, for a wonderful summary of your own journey with this book, which is, I repeat, Catholicism End or Beginning, the unfinished manuscript of the late, great Mary Daly. I'm delighted to hear your remarks. I'm sorry you didn't write an essay as well. I think we may have to have volume 2 here. Um, I think you've made very strongly the point that I made in that pithy little phrase, peeping Thomist, that Mary Daly was a peeping Thomist. I told her that, by the way. She got a good chuckle. And because I do think she kept many of the forms, if not the content, of her, as it were, native Catholicism. I also would have to say that when you talked about the so-called infamous, I would probably call it the famous walk out of Memorial Church, people will remember that she was the first woman to give a sermon at Memorial Church at Harvard University. And on that occasion in 70, correct me, Meg, help me, 71, when she finished her sermon and invited women and men to accompany her down the center aisle and walk out of the church. Many did that. One, who will remain nameless, later confessed that she had snuck in the back door for coffee, and for the coffee hour. And I've always seen that as sort of the not only the time it takes to make changes in one's own life, but also the ambivalence about that and the possibility of at least just go for the coffee. So anyway, I won't. I'll leave that story for later. But that is really, in some ways, emblematic of what you're talking about. That there are ways in which one goes down the center aisle, out the door, and then back in the back door for coffee. So I'll leave it at that. With great gratitude to you, Meg, for your work on this. I think we can't underestimate the contribution that you have made with this, not only with your remarks today, but with the entire volume. The fact that we have it in our possession, Jennifer and I, hanging our heads that we might have been the ones who, instead of putting it in the dumpster like a lot of other things we put in, when we put Mary Daly's things away, we put stuff in the dumpster. God knows, Jennifer, what we put in the dumpster. But this is really very exciting, and I can't overestimate it. I can't overemphasize it. And I think our presence here today, nearly 50 strong, gives you an idea of how important your work is. And I want you to take that with you. I'm going to open the floor now for questions and comments. And if you use the chat button at the bottom, I'm sorry, the react button at the bottom, and simply raise your hand, that will give us a good cue for who comes next in the pecking order here of people making remarks. I would also like to invite in a special way Lisa Cahill and Sochi Alviso and Jennifer Reisinger. If any one of you, don't need to, I'm not putting you on the spot, don't feel any requirement, but if you wanted to just make a very brief comment or something along that line, you'd be first. So if Jennifer and Lisa and Sochi would like to be first, put your hands up, and if you can't find that button, just wave your right front paw. This was and I often say in the Catholic schools, we learn to pound our chest at the same time. Stir, stir, stir. That meant sister. I got the answer. So stir, stir. So Jennifer first, and then Lisa will be next, and then Sochi if you have anything. But just very brief, and go ahead, Jen.
First of all, it's very Mary Daly-ish that my familiar, her name is Lissa, the bringer of chaos, decided to jump on my lap just now. Secondly, the late, great Emily Culpepper had a phrase of what her relationship was to the Christianity in which she was raised. She referred to it, Christianity, as compost. She said, compost, yes, it's garbage, but it's useful. I always loved that. And finally, Mary, I know exactly what I threw in the dumpster. I believe it was about 400 junk faxes of the early 2000s and all of the airline receipts for Mary's travels. I'm pretty sure that's the only thing I threw away.
Well, I wish I had that much recall. I have I just remember that day how much we had
oh my goodness,
to carry. I just want to
Meg, it's an absolutely wonderful book and a very good job in presenting it. And I totally agree. We need your essay too, and it could end up in another volume, or it could end up in a journal somewhere. Keep the Mary Daly discussion going. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I love the story of you from the two of us, actually. And I think we both mentioned it in our essays when we took the copy of the Summa Theologica to Mary Daly in the nursing home. And she was rather addled by that time, but we just pulled a few kinds of things that we thought she might really like to have with her. And you describe it so well, how gently and lovingly and almost tearfully she fingered that book that had been so important to her. So that adds another dimension, Meg, to your own argument, I think. Yes. Lisa, did you want to make a comment, please?
Yeah,
Welcome.
I don't have anything profound to say. I just want to thank you, Mary, for hosting this and Meg for your wonderful overview and pulling out some new threads. Um, I can totally see what you said about many of the authors identifying that the book manuscript you discovered was dropped at a point of real change in her life. And I could sort of appreciate from what you were saying that she felt she was a different person and she needed to start with a different vision instead of recrafting the one from the past. The only thing I just wanted to add, and it's a really small point, and it has to do with being inside and outside of Catholicism. My experience today is that the boundaries of most things, including Catholicism or the Catholic Church, are very broad and porous. And there's a lot of people in spaces and identities and doing work that at the time Mary was writing, or in the time I also was a child, which was before Vatican II, they would not be regarded as inside the church. Okay, now I'm teaching at a Jesuit university in New England, and there's tons of pluralism going on in every direction. And it's I don't know, I just feel like it is more possible to kind of have that insider outsider status at the same time. And I appreciated more when I read the manuscript and then read some of the other things that she wrote around the same time, how that was just not possible then. Or maybe it was, but it wasn't very easy. So it's it's a generational shift and something that I think some of us benefit from depending on where we are. So I'm fortunate to be where I am, where we have, a lot of queer students and faculty and people doing work on queer theology, and nobody in the theology department, I mean, and nobody, at least overtly or in the way we feel we're treated, that's not really questioned, although not everybody would agree with it, but, we're doing our own kind of, I don't know, work. Um, so yeah, so I just wanted to add that in. I think, and it's probably true of a lot of organizations or group identities, corporate identities. So
That's very helpful, Lisa,
that's
and
all.
it also speaks to the question of, or the critique of, why didn't she quote more women, and why didn't she, in the manuscript, why didn't she quote more women, and why didn't she use inclusive language?
I mean,
Guess
where
what?
were
There
they?
weren't anybody.
Yeah.
Her
I mean,
mother, you know?
she mentioned the ones that were there at the council.
Right.
And when I was writing, I could think of a few more who were at the council, but she didn't have even like Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, who's only like 10 years younger, but Elizabeth then had a lot more options in terms of
10 years, like
supporting
just 10
Catholicism.
years later.
Yeah.
Because why? Because Mary Daly had come through, and paved the way, I think. Let's
Well,
go
it was
to
also that much further after Vatican II.
absolutely.
Right. And women were starting more to get degrees. Like Elizabeth was German, but she studied, or is German, but she studied in Germany, not in the US, where there weren't as many opportunities. But even the fact that Sister Madaleva started that program for women to get doctorates in theology that Mary then was able to go through, that was like the beginning.
That's right.
Or I'm not saying that was the only thing in the beginning, but it was part of an opening, I think.
Well, but they didn't allow women in doctoral programs in Catholic universities, at least in any numbers, for quite some while, which is why Madaleva set up the so-called, as you called it correctly, the ladies' degree, it was called. It
Yeah,
was
exactly.
ladies'
Yeah,
degree. And then
yeah,
Mary went on to get the two philosophy and theology doctorates with most of her classes in Latin in Fribourg.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
hello. So
yeah.
we're not talking about a slacker here. Let's go to Soshi, and then I want to open it up for lots of other people who have things to say I can see. Soshi, do you want to say a word or two?
Yeah, just first a comment in terms of Lisa's comments is that, it points to how Mary was always ahead of her time. The boundary living that now we can experience that at the time was,
Yeah.
yeah, not possible. And I think the only thing I want to say is just how appreciative I still am of the tools that Mary provides, and has continued to provide, what I mean, through now this, new manuscript for our own, for those of us who have stayed within the tradition of Christianity. I just find her frameworks and her tools so necessary for how we participate as a self and a part. I mean, as someone that appreciates inheritance and someone that's able and willing to critique it. That balance between those different things, I feel that if more people embraced their kind of participation in the religious traditions in that manner, we'd have less fundamentalism, less abuse of power, I mean, less kind of rigid, mummified traditions. So that's all. I continue
That's a
to be
lot.
appreciative.
Thank you. Thanks, Soshi. That's a lot. Floor is open. Raise your hand or wave, and we'll line people up. Maureen Mancuso first from California. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much, Meg. I really loved listening to this and that whole relationship between um, the Catholic substance and the Protestant principles. But I was really curious. I thought it was very interesting when Mary Daly's antagonist of Thomistic theology, and they both left behind unfinished manuscripts for, Thomas never completed the Summa Theologica, and there was something that um, was beyond what they were doing that compelled them to move. Well, in his instance, he just laid down the pen, but she did too, but and just moved in a different direction from. I mean, I'm assuming it was. Am I wrong to think she really turned away from this direction she was headed with this manuscript? I wanted to be clear about that first.
Thanks, Maureen. Meg.
Yeah, sure. So you just clarify your question a little bit in terms of why she laid behind this in relationship to Thomas?
Yeah. Um, not the relationship with Thomas, but in her own journey. Um, I think you could parallel their journeys in terms of the quest of their theological explorations. But it certainly was something that moved both of them in a different direction. And I wonder if you could elaborate um, on her connection to that. It seemed very profound to me that these two works that were pretty classic, one traditional scholasticism and the other really the reminder of the second sex that was created in the world, and the need for the parity for both. I just found that very interesting. It's more of a comment than a question, but do you have more detail
Go
about
ahead. Meg, go
what
ahead. Thanks,
she
Maureen.
said?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a fascinating comment. I'll just briefly respond to say that, I think, at least in my own scholarship of both Thomas and Mary Daly, that I think his overarching vision, specifically his understanding of teleology, what she would later call in later works the telic focusing principle. Jennifer Rosengo writes profoundly about this as well. That there was something much more deeper that was drawing her. It moved her in a lot of ways beyond the limitations of the church at the time. But I think that she went in search, and this is Lisa Cahill writes about this as well in her essay, right? In search of that deeper capital G good. I think ironically that it was Thomas's own spirituality that might have encouraged her to have that push. But I think of, certainly within Thomas's understanding of the Summa, right? It's all straw, right? It's all sort of nothing at the end when you come to the concept of the beatific vision. I think Mary Daly probably would have held on to that too. Her life's work was the books were what they were, but that was nothing in comparison to the deeper spiritual journey that I think she was on.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Megan. I think if I remember correctly, I think with Thomas Aquinas, there was some kind of mystical experience that I think it was at a mass where he gave up the ghost, as it were, and died a few months later. But I'm very fascinated by this question of mysticism in Mary Daly, and I think she may have had some other experiences too that she didn't write about, but that in fact produced later Beyond God the Father. And that was Lavinia Byrne raised the question in her review about the use of the word mystic, and I've sent her a note to try to explain what I mean. And I think, but it's interesting that a number of us in the volume talk about Mary Daly as a mystic. How she found the divine, the whatever she calls it, in the clover and in the hedge and so forth. And that may not be too different from what Thomas found. I don't know. Anyway, good question, Maureen. Let's go on. Who will be next? Rosemary Ganley? Unmute, please, Rosemary. Rosemary Ganley from Peterborough, Ontario. Unmute, please.
I just want to testify that the great fun is on the boundaries. And I thank you, Meg, and all of you who worked on this piece, this book that I'll be ordering soon. I find it describes exactly where I am as a critical journalist. I just copied out the Synod's report from group number 5 about women. And it would benefit, should any thinkers be around, reading that and reading you and the work the prodigious work that's been done on behalf of women. I'm just grateful that I'm here.
It's embarrassing, isn't it? All these trades for nothing.
74 pages of apologia.
We know the problems, but we're not going to fix them. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a war going on.
Anyway, thank you very much for affirmation at my late age and in the Canadian context.
Thank you, Rosemary Ganley, soon to turn 89 later this month.
Yeah.
Who will be next? And regular columnist, by the way, for the Peterborough Examiner. I really recommend Rosemary's columns. And soon to be the 4th annual Water Rosemary Ganley Essay Contest will be announced. And we give a prize of $650 for 650 words for the Rosemary Ganley essays. So if you are interested in writing, please, or your students are interested in writing, watch for that. It'll be out in the next week. Who's next? Let's go right along. Mary Condren, I want to ask you a question. You were the maybe one of the only people here who was a student of Mary Daly. How many people were students? Anybody who was a student of Mary Daly's here with us today? Mary Condren, I know you were.
I was, yes, and still am.
Who else? Yeah.
Yeah, I was a student of Mary Daly's. I came to Harvard as a research associate in 1980. Was it 79, I think, yeah. And the first thing I did, of course, was to sign up for her classes. And the second thing I did was to have a fight with her. And we had an interesting relationship from that point on. because all the rest of the class really turned on me because of something I had said. And I'm very belligerent, as you probably know. And I wasn't going to be put off by that kind of thing. So in the end, we ended up being great friends. And she said to somebody, not to me directly, she's a witch. She's a witch. She's a warrior. Which turned out to be right. She actually, when I launched my book and came in Harvard in 1989, she came and she actually endorsed my book. And I said I wasn't taking any questions, and some guy wanted to ask me a question, and I said, "Sorry, I'm tired." She stormed down the hall. "Don't you dare say you're tired! Don't you dare say you're tired!" But my favorite story about Mary Daly, and I probably have loads of them, was when I'd arrived in Boston at the same time as the Pope in 1979, and the word went out that no women were to be allowed on the altar. Because that would not be respectful of his lordship or his fathership or his holiness or whatever it was. So the Boston Theological Institute all got together, and we planned an event in the church. I forget now the name of the church, and we planned letters to the Boston whatever. And of course, I went into the class next week thinking that Mary would be delighted. She, with our courage, she came in. She had a tome of books that size. She banged them on the table. "Where is your pride? Where is your pride? If you wanted to be Pope, I could understand it. But please, please let me in. Please let me in." As she went through everybody in the class for, for what we had done. It was really a learning process in that and in many other ways. And you talk about the mystical element, and you just mentioned the trees and the thing. But what it reminds me of is the particularly Irish understanding of divinity, which is divine vibrations, or the Nyart, which is the strength. And when she came to Ireland, she went all around the holy wells and whatever, trying to get a sense of that energy, and seeing it and experiencing it in different ways. So I loved her dearly and fought with her boldly, but may she rest in peace.
Thank you, Mary Conchon. There's some good comments in the chat. One person experienced Mary Daly as a mystic, and her discipline and genius was to translate her mystical reality into books and tools that could reach and beckon and empower so many. That's an interesting way of putting it. I think the one question from Elizabeth Green: does this manuscript add anything new to Daly's thought as we know it? Anybody want to take a look at that? Does it add anything? That's one question. The other question that I'd like to pair with that is, I have the impression, and I think maybe some of you who are more in Catholic circles than I am could explain this to me, but I have the impression that she spent a lot of time talking about Catholicism, but that official institutional Catholicism has done very little thinking about her. I'm scandalized, Meg, to think that you were taught as you were, because it's absolutely wrong. But I would be deeply and pleasantly shocked if Mr. Pope Leo, a native speaker of Southside Chicago English, had read the first word of Mary Daly. But what's your impression from some of these Catholic schools or Catholic places where you've been, folks? What did anybody take her? Does anybody take her seriously? Does anybody take her as a major Catholic thinker? And how did her work shape synodality, this now obviously defunct concept, bankrupt concept after the report yesterday? Synodality got women nowhere. I'm just wondering if there's any, how do you see this? How does this work? Did she just fall away there in the 70s, as Meg's professors so erroneously taught her, or does she still have a place in the, I mean, we're creating a new place for her. And by the way, her centennial is coming up, centennial of her birth in 2 years, and I'm hoping Boston College will be having an enormous celebration of that with the opening of the Mary Daly Chair, I'm hoping. So Lisa, you can tell your friends there that I'm hoping for that, and don't disappoint me. I'm joking, of course, but I think it would be great, because that's what we need to do, is to have this conversation in the widest possible open spaces and not simply get focused on one or two issues about which Mary Daly was not particularly well informed and in fact was wrong. But anybody, Carrie, you want to take a stab at any of that? Or
I just want to name that Dr. Mercedes Iannone with the Institute of Pastoral Care at St. Thomas University School of Theology. She steeped us. We read and
Mary Daly.
signed Mary Daly. unfortunately, that institute has been shut down and replaced by a football team and Ave Maria, fundamentalist Catholicism. But just know, I live, and all kinds of people who provided care for HIV/AIDS patients who had no remedy back in the day knew about Mary Daly. And
Great.
I do believe in the communion of the saints, so I'm hoping they're working their magic.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks so much. That's really helpful. Other people, examples, ideas?
I might just respond to Elizabeth's question about whether the manuscript adds anything to Mary Daly, to our understanding of Mary Daly. And again, this comes partly from having read the manuscript and also from experiencing her in class. I think the major thing that changed her direction was her encounter with sociology and anthropology. And that came out very much more in gynecology, which I'd read before I actually went to Boston College, and that's probably why I wanted to take her classes. But I think she was, what really struck me was she was engaging there in a critique of what Pierre Bourdieu would call cultural capital. There wasn't that name for it at the time, but she made she began to understand that the worldview of Catholicism and Protestantism was one thing, but what was much more dangerous to the world at this point was the buildup of nuclear weapons. Every time she came into class, she said, "We are 5 minutes to doomsday. We are 4 minutes. We have 3 minutes." She was very much aware of the dangers and that's not in the manuscript. There's a couple of mentions of sociologists in the manuscripts, but in our classes, and I probably still have the bibliography somewhere in my own archives, she brought in quite a few sociological thinkers, which were not altogether well known at that point, and that's certainly I was very interested in, and what's the word? Yeah, I was very interested in what she was doing and the way she was doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And that also raises a question that emerged in one of the essays of the book, Siobhan Garrigan's essay, which I wish she were here to talk about the question of Mary Daly was a speculative theologian versus a pastoral or practical theologian. And I think that is to get caught into the old ways of thinking about how theology is parsed, as it were, and misses the whole way in which feminist liberation theology and other liberation theologies bring those dimensions of theory and praxis together. So I think that if you only read this little aborted manuscript, you might think that, but with a wider, broader read of Daly, I think maybe not. Meg, what's your take on this?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to end, I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I mean, first, for at least my theological training, would be doing a disservice, since one of my professors is Lisa Cahill, who's in the room, has taught me as an undergraduate at Boston College. But I think that it wasn't as much of when we think about what happened to her after, the focus on my own theological training was how significant she was in paving the way for feminist theology, right? But that even in that articulation, she's seen as a relic. So part of it then in my own studies, when I was writing on Mary Daly on my dissertation, I could not find any modern Catholic theologian that cited Mary Daly beyond God the Father. So that was just in my own research. And part of that, I think, is because once you start reading the later Daly works, you need to read all of them together, that they're held, Amazon Grace, Quintessence, Gynecology, the Wikidary, that they're all held together. But with that being said, I think that your point, Mary, is well taken, as we see popes citing more and more from lay Catholic theologians in time. I mean, who knows? Church in the Second Sex is taught widely. The possibility that Pope Leo read some sections of Church in the Second Sex, I would say, is a high probability. Maybe not gynecology, but I'll put my money on the first two books.
I'm not going to bet the farm, Meg, but anyway. Hey, we're at the top of the hour. I'm going to end our conversation here with Meg's good comments and simply thank everybody for being part of this. I also want to, in a particular way, pay tribute to those who have written in the book, because really the essays, the combination is just genius, and that's you, Meg. We'll make sure that you get a link to the video and the notes in the next week or so. And please feel free to share this program with family and friends, with colleagues, community members. And let me simply mention 3 future water programs. One on St. Patrick's Day, actually, on Tuesday, March 17th, Diane New, celebrating Women's History Month with the water community. And that will be at 7:30 p.m., a time to raise up women and speak their names. And I hope Mary Daly's name will be among them. We will have our next water meditation on April the 13th. That's a Monday night at 7:30 p.m. These are all East Coast times, with Jean Christensen here present. Rest in a time of chaos. It's mine, and you can't have it or me. So who knows where that's going, and I know it will be interesting and fun. I also will recommend for your consideration the next book in this series, which is a Water Talk coming up on Wednesday, April 15th, with Ashley Marie Purpura, Women in the Orthodox Tradition, Feminism, Theology, and Equality, a University of Notre Dame Press book in 2025. This is the Greek and Russian Orthodox women, among others, looking very seriously at some of the same issues that Mary Daly looked at 50 years ago. We're delighted to have Dr. Purpura with us on April 15th to discuss this. And I think it shows how the roots of Mary Daly, having been watered, planted by Mary Daly, having been watered, are now bearing fruit in a variety of places. And the Orthodox churches are probably not ready for everything that's coming their way. And that will put them in good company with the Roman Catholic Church, which still hasn't gotten with the program on most of this. But this is a big book, like Meg's book is a big one, with many insights into the work of Orthodox women laid out in clear and detailed fashion, and paying great homage to some of their four-sisters. So I highly recommend it, and we'll be looking forward to the conversation. Let me simply end by saying that water programs are free, open to everybody. Donations are always welcome, needed. But we try to socialize resources. That's what we do. People who can't go to seminary, people who can't go to the graduate school, those who can donate, do so generously. So we've always made water programs available to everyone without charge. We believe that if we share, I'm going to repeat it, if we share, among us there's enough. 40 plus years later, we continue to be pleased with the fact that there's enough. And it's because people like Meg Stapleton Smith and others who have shared so generously today do so, and make it possible for the rest of us to learn and to put our learning to the use of, to the work of peace and justice. So with that, I say thank you to everybody.